And now here's Joe Adamov to share with you some of his impressions of the United States.
21 days in America may not be a long time, but they left an indelible impression. I was invited by the University of Minnesota to lecture at the Department of Speech Communication. I'm ever grateful to Professors Donald Brown, Assistant Professor Kim Elliott, Professor William Howell, and President McGraw for making the trip possible. After an uphill battle, they finally got me a United States entry visa. Minnesota did it. But in the spirit of the festive season, I'll say this: let bygones be bygones. I have no grudge against Uncle Sam. The students at the university seemed bright, on the ball, and friendly, and it was a pleasure meeting them. I stayed in the home of Professor Howell and his wife Jessie, and became a member of the family. At least, that's how I felt. Though our political backgrounds may be different, we as people got along fine. Which brings me to the thought that we can and should be friends as nations too. Late one evening, I went out walking, as I often do at home. The only people I met were joggers, who on meeting me would say, "Hi," or "Good evening." We do the same here in small communities in the Caucasus, for instance. And what would have been their surprise had they known that the man that answered them came from Moscow, of all places. Friendly people, even to strangers. The same was true on the huge campus. The facilities, to my eye, were excellent, but coming from a country with free education, cost of tuition sounded kind of unfamiliar. I take my hat off to the Minnesota Daily, who gave a fair and unbiased account of what I said to the Murphy Hall audience. Good journalism, Eric Lindbaum, and thank you for printing a 6x6 photograph of my overweight countenance. A good picture, Jeff Goldberg. One evening, I was listening to the Bob Allard open line show on KSTP radio and phoned in a question. After a minute or so, Bob said, "The voice sounds rather familiar." And I had to admit who I was. Would you believe it, Bob Allard had been a listener to Radio Moscow for many, many years. The next day we met in a cozy restaurant, and later that evening the tables were turned. I did the answering for 3 hours on the open line show. People called from far and wide, and to quote the Minnesota Daily, the callers were courteous, and many thanked Adamov for clearing up false impressions about the Soviet Union handed down from the years of the Cold War paranoia and bomb shelters. I ended my 3 hours on the air by saying, I learnt the hockey coach of the University of Minnesota had been named coach for the United States team at Lake Placid. Let us do all our fighting on the hockey field, I said, and let's relegate the battlefield to history. Bob Allard is a charming personality with thick white hair. A lady clergyman came up to him in the restaurant and right in front of her husband told Bob that he was the handsomest man she'd ever met. She invited him to her sermon the next day. While at the university, I told the students that they dress just like the students do in Moscow: jeans, down coats, and knitted caps. But in Moscow, that is at the university, they don't sit on the floor in the corridors. In Minneapolis, it was the natural thing to do. I was really moved when, on entering one of the university buildings, a student handed me a leaflet urging me to fight so that SALT II would be ratified. Public-minded students who are concerned about the fate of their nation, because SALT II benefits them just as much as it benefits us. I sometimes wonder why our two nations are not on better terms than we are today with all those good people that I met in all my too brief a stay. In Chicago, my host at the press club was Bill Boykin, director of the Inland Daily Press Association, and his charming wife, Rebecca. Later, at the Drury Lane Theater in Chicago, I saw a wonderful presentation of The Evolution of Jazz, a professional musical that would be a hit anywhere. In New York, I was thrilled to meet Peter Ustinov, actor, producer, writer, and many more things too. A man with a subtle sense of humor that always seems to emanate from that great personality. I told Peter Ustinov that in Moscow, I heard every single one of the installments of his autobiographical Dear Me talks over the BBC in English. We chatted in a little waiting room prior to taping the Good Morning America show. David Hartman and Sandy were great, but the half-hour talk that I had with David after the show would, I'm sure, have been even more interesting. Pity there was so little time. On the air, I assured David that I would not be sent to Siberia for anything I might have said on the show that my government might not have approved of. In Winnebago, Illinois, in Kansas City, Missouri, in Fort Lauderdale, I was guest of my old friends from People to People, a non-profit organization founded by President Eisenhower. They arrange professional and other special interest groups to meet their counterparts in other lands. I met Les Davis, director and coordinator of People to People, 22 years ago when he was covering the visit of a farming group to the Soviet Union for a television station in Illinois, and I was covering their stay for Radio Moscow. We've been in contact ever since, and here I was, a guest in their homes. Les has been in my home in Moscow and knows my wife. Who would have thought that I'd also visit Tom Davis at WSDR Radio at Sterling, Illinois, the station that has been playing Radio Moscow tapes despite the fury of federal officialdom. All honor to you, Tom, and WSDR. Give my very best wishes to the staff that I met on that all-too-brief visit. In Kansas City, Missouri, Jim Doty, president of People to People, laid out the red carpet for me with a welcome sign in his office. Thank you, Jim Doty, and thank you, Eunice, his wife, who my wife says is the embodiment of love and goodwill. The Crown Center in Kansas City, with its indoor fountain, overwhelmed me. Blue skies and bright sunshine accompanied me during my stay in Kansas, a contrast to the snows of Minneapolis. Incidentally, the university in Kansas City is no less impressive. But perhaps the highlight of my visit to Kansas City was when the mayor, Mr. Berkeley, received me and gave me the key to the city on a red, white, and blue ribbon. Kansas, I hope to see you again, and I'll cherish the key to your door. This was just before Christmas, and the trees were decorated with colored lights in front of many homes. This struck me as a very beautiful tradition. We, too, have our Santa Claus, only we call him Grandfather Frost, and he usually has an assistant called Snow Maiden. And we, too, decorate our trees and send greeting cards, only on New Year's. In Lawrence, Kansas, my hosts were Peggy and Don Fisher. Peggy works with Mopin Tour, an agency, a tourist agency that caters to tourists that come to our country, too, and Don is active in People to People. Peggy must have been so excited over that big red Bolshevik coming to stay with them that her foot ended up in a plaster cast. On it I wrote, "May this be the worst thing that ever happens to you." In Kansas, I visited the home of Zelma and Don Millman. Zelma acted as arbiter and mediator when Jim Doty and I got into a heated argument one evening. And when the rear right wheel of Jim's Cadillac started to shimmy, it was so sweet of Zelma to take me to the airport in her baby Toyota. I hope today she knows how to switch on the defroster in the rear view window. The Millmans are also members of People to People, and I hope to see them in Moscow one day. Also Dr. and Mrs. Riza and Kay Menninger and her son Philip. Both are direct descendants of the great founder of the Menninger Foundation that caters to mental health in Topeka, Kansas. At the foundation, I was told of some interesting work in a new non-drug method for control of hypertension and biofeedback, which makes possible the regulation of involuntary physiological processes. And finally, my good friend Bob Doucet of Mopin Tour, who was so gracious a host during my stay in Lawrence, Kansas. He took so much of his time to show me around. I flew from Kansas to New York and on to Moscow. And speaking of New York, outside the United Nations building, there's a statue by a Soviet sculptor of a muscular man beating his sword into a plowshare. And on that note, I want to say, thank you, America.
Joe Adamov, sharing his impressions of the United States.